What if your childhood fears weren't just nightmares? When 5 childhood friends reunite in their old town, they uncover a dark secret that ties them to an ancient evil, an entity that feeds off their memories and fears. As they confront their past, they must face the monsters they once feared, before the entity consumes them all. Disturbing childhood memory. The streets of Redwood Hills had never felt so small. They seemed to shrink with every passing year, yet they were still just as haunting. The once familiar town was now a shadow of itself, coated with layers of dust and memories. What was supposed to be a simple reunion, a gathering of friends who had grown up together, became a moment fraught with unease, the air thick with the secrets they'd buried. Lily was the first to arrive. Her eyes scanned the familiar town square, where everything had remained frozen in time. Rusted streetlights, the same diner with the cracked neon sign that flickered too often, and the crumbling brick walls of the high school that had once been their playground. As she took a deep breath, the scent of pine trees mixed with something she couldn't quite place. A faint, musty odor that felt like the remnants of something long forgotten. She never thought she'd return. When the nightmares started, when the memories resurfaced, she thought she had left this place behind for good. She hadn't spoken to any of the others since they had left, each of them driven by the need to escape the horrors of their shared past. But now here she was. Something about the old town, its eerie stillness, its quiet pull, had drawn her back. And when the message arrived, a simple note with an invitation from Mark, asking them to return to Redwood Hills for one night, it was impossible to ignore. She wasn't the only one who had felt the weight of this place, the weight of the memories pressing down on her. Mark, Sarah, Jason, and Ben, all of them carried the same burden. After all these years, they had all come back, still haunted by the same unspoken truth. Lily walked through the town square, her footsteps echoing on the empty sidewalk. She passed the same old bakery where they used to buy pastries after school, but now the windows were cracked and dark. Her chest tightened as her mind drifted to the past, to the house at the edge of town. The house they all feared, yet never spoke of. When the others arrived, it felt like no time had passed at all. Mark, once the confident leader of their group, looked older, his face etched with the years of running from something he could never quite remember. Sarah was the first to greet her, her familiar smile tinged with nervousness, as if she too could feel the weight of the past pulling them all together again. Jason and Ben, quieter than the rest, both arrived moments later, their expressions unreadable. But there was something in their eyes, something they couldn't hide. "We're really doing this?" Jason asked, his voice a little too sharp for the moment. "Are we really ready to face what we left behind?" Sarah added softly, glancing at the others, her eyes filled with a mix of dread and curiosity. Lily didn't answer immediately. She just nodded, her eyes searching the faces of her old friends. They were still the same people, yet completely different, the years of silence and separation leaving their marks. They had all carried the same dark memories, the same unspoken truths that had once torn them apart. But now, it was time to confront it all. "Let's go inside," Mark said, his voice low, as if speaking louder would break the fragile silence that had settled over them. He motioned toward the old diner, its faded sign hanging precariously above the door. It had been their meeting place as kids, the backdrop to all the laughter and whispered secrets they once shared. They walked in together, the door creaking with a familiar, ominous groan. The interior was unchanged. The worn booths, the cracked tiles on the floor, the smell of old coffee, everything felt both comforting and suffocating. The weight of their past seemed to press down on the room like a heavy blanket. It was a place where they had shared so many memories, yet so many of those memories felt distant, like they were living someone else's life. They all sat down at the same booth they had once claimed as their own. The table was just as sticky as it had been all those years ago, but it didn't matter. They were together again, just as they had been in the days before everything fell apart. But this time, there would be no more running. "What are we doing here, Mark?" Sarah finally spoke, breaking the silence that had settled between them. We've all been trying to forget what happened here. You know it wasn't just a bunch of kids' fears? Mark glanced around the table, his eyes hard. We need to remember. We can't run anymore, Jason snorted, pushing his chair back slightly. What's there to remember? A bunch of nightmares and weird stuff that happened in a house? That's not enough to drag us all back here. Ben, who had been silent until now, leaned forward, his gaze focused on Mark. You've been talking about going back to that house. You think that's the answer? Mark didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out the window, his jaw tightening. That house is where it all started. If we don't go back, if we don't face it, then it'll keep haunting us. We need to know the truth. Lily felt a chill run down her spine at the mention of the house, the place they had all feared but never dared approach. They had promised each other that they would never go back, that they would leave the house behind. But now the house was calling them again, and this time they knew they had to answer. It was time to confront the memories they had buried so deep. They couldn't hide from the truth anymore. The house, the whispers, the shadows, it was all part of something darker than they had ever realized. Let's go, Lily said, her voice quiet but resolute. It's the only way we'll ever know what really happened. As they stood up to leave, the door swung open, letting in a gust of cold wind. Emily shivered, glancing over her shoulder. For a moment, the town felt like a different place. The streets were empty, the air heavy with something unseen. And as they walked out into the night, the distant sound of footsteps echoed from somewhere deep within the town, as if something or someone was already waiting for them. The past had come to find them, and now there was no escaping it. The air felt heavier as they approached the house at the edge of town that none of them had dared to visit in over 2 decades. The overgrown yard stretched in front of them like a forgotten memory, with thick vines crawling up the decaying walls, twisting around the rotting wooden beams. The windows, once gleaming with life, were now dark and empty, like hollow eyes staring out into the night. The house had always been off-limits, the subject of whispered conversations in the halls of Redwood Hills Elementary, of daredevil challenges and stories that spun the line between childhood imagination and raw fear. But now, as they stood on the cracked pavement, the childhood bravado they once shared seemed distant and fragile. This wasn't a game anymore. This was real. The house, which had once felt like an ominous legend, now felt like a living thing. A place with a pulse, an energy that radiated from the very walls. The town had changed around it. The streets had been repaved, the nearby park renovated, and the old shops on Main Street had long been replaced with new businesses. But this house, this forsaken relic, had stood still in time. It was as if the town had purposely ignored it, erased it from memory. And yet, the house had never let them forget. Lily was the first to step forward. The others hesitated, their feet glued to the ground, unwilling to be the first to break the uneasy stillness. She felt the familiar pang of fear rise in her chest, the feeling of being drawn toward something darker than she could comprehend. Her fingers trembled as she pushed back the strands of hair that had fallen into her face. She could still hear her mother's warning in her ears, a ghost of her past. Stay away from that house. Lily, some things are better left alone. But now, standing on the cusp of the house's decaying doorstep, Lily knew she could no longer run. Whatever it was that had been haunting her, haunting them all, was tied to this place. The past wasn't finished with them. It had been waiting, calling them back, and it wouldn't let them go until they faced what had happened all those years ago. Are we really doing this? Sarah's voice was tight, strained with a mixture of fear and reluctant curiosity. Lily glanced back, her eyes meeting Sarah's. She nodded slowly. We have to. We can't move on until we know what happened here. What really happened? Mark stepped forward, his face set in grim determination. This was never just a haunted house. We all know it. It was something worse. Jason, who had been standing at the back, looking more reluctant than anyone else, let out a long, shaky breath. I don't know if I'm ready for this, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. What if it's all just in our heads? What if we're just chasing shadows? Ben turned to face him, his face taut with a combination of fear and anger. "If we don't face it now, it'll always be with us." "You know that?" The others exchanged uneasy glances, but one by one they all followed Lily toward the front door, which hung crookedly on its hinges, as if it had been waiting for them to return. The first step onto the rotting porch creaked loudly under their weight, sending a jolt of discomfort through the group. As they entered the house, the heavy silence seemed to engulf them. The air was stale, thick with dust, and a strange metallic scent, as though the house had not been empty for long, but it had. The walls, once vibrant with the laughter of children and the bustle of everyday life, were now cracked and crumbling. The floorboards groaned underfoot, the wood warped by years of neglect. Lily's eyes immediately found the staircase leading to the attic, just as she remembered it. The stairs were steep, narrow, and dark, the faint remnants of a forgotten light bulb flickering overhead. She could almost hear the echo of the footsteps from her childhood, the slow, deliberate steps that had followed her every time she dared to climb them. Every step she had taken toward the attic had been a step closer to something terrible, but she had always stopped herself. Until now. "Lily, wait," Ben said, his voice hushed with concern. "We don't have to go up there. We can figure this out without—" "No!" Lily cut him off, her voice firm. "We have to go up there. We need to understand what happened, what we were a part of." Her words sent a ripple of unease through the group. No one spoke as they followed her up the stairs, each of them consumed by their own memories of that attic, memories they had tried to bury. Sarah remembered the shadow that had lurked in the corner, always out of sight but never far from her. Jason could recall the suffocating darkness, the feeling that someone or something was always just behind him. When they reached the top of the stairs, Lily reached out and pushed open the door to the attic, the hinges groaning loudly in protest. A rush of cold air hit them, carrying with it the scent of mold and decay. The attic was exactly as they had left it all those years ago, untouched, undisturbed. But the air was different now. There was something else in the room, something that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. Lily stepped into the room, her flashlight sweeping across the old, faded furniture, the piles of dusty boxes stacked in the corners, and the sheets covering the forgotten objects. But it wasn't the old furniture that caught her attention. It was the corner of the room. The same corner where, as a child, she had always felt someone was watching her. In the farthest corner of the attic, hidden beneath an old sheet, something caught her eye. It was a box, small, wooden, and intricately carved with strange symbols. Symbols that she recognized. Symbols that they had all seen before, etched into the walls of the house and in the nightmares they had shared. With trembling hands, Lily moved toward the box. The others followed closely behind her, their faces pale, their breaths shallow. She opened it slowly, as if afraid of what might be inside. Inside the box were faded photographs, old trinkets, and a crumpled piece of paper. As Lily unfolded the paper, she gasped. It was a drawing, a crude sketch of the house. The same house, but with one significant difference. The house was surrounded by dark, twisting shadows, and at the center, there was a figure. A faceless figure, its arms outstretched toward them. "This," Lily whispered, her voice shaking with horror. "It was waiting for us." The air grew cold, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow longer, stretching toward them, as if reaching for the very souls of the people who dared to step into this house. And just as Lily was about to speak, the floor beneath them groaned again. The air shifted, and for a brief moment they could hear it. The soft sound of footsteps echoing from somewhere deep within the house. A sound that wasn't just in their memories. The house was waking up. The house seemed to breathe around them, its ancient timbers creaking as if it had come alive, welcoming them back to a nightmare they had tried to forget. The air in the attic was heavy, thick with the weight of decades of silence. But now, as they stood in the dimly lit space, the stillness felt almost suffocating. Every breath they took seemed to carry the scent of dust and decay, the stale remnants of a forgotten history. Lily's hands were still trembling as she held the drawing in front of her. The face of the faceless figure haunted her, its arms outstretched toward them in the drawing, its presence both terrifying and familiar. She tried to force the memories out, but they clawed their way back, insistent and unstoppable. "We need to leave," Jason said, his voice strained, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "This is too much. Whatever this is, whatever happened here, we can't deal with it. Not now, not after all these years." But Lily didn't move. She couldn't. The house was pulling her in, wrapping its dark tendrils around her mind. She could feel it. This place was alive, and it was waiting for them to make the next move. "Jason's right," Sarah said, her voice shaky, but there was an edge of fear in it. "This house isn't normal. This isn't just some old building. Something's wrong with it." "Something's been wrong for a long time." Ben stepped forward, his voice firm but laced with uncertainty. "We have to confront it. We can't keep running. We've been running from this for 20 years, and it's never let us go. It's not going to stop until we face it." Lily finally looked up from the drawing, her eyes wide with realization. "This house, it's not just haunted by ghosts. It's feeding on our fear. It always has been." The others exchanged nervous glances, the weight of her words sinking in. They were no longer children, but they were still trapped by the same force that had haunted them in their youth. They had all felt it before. The cold chill that would creep up their spines at night. The shadows that seemed to move when no one was looking. The whispers that came from nowhere, too faint to hear but too strong to ignore. The shadows in the attic seemed to lengthen, twisting in unnatural ways, bending and folding like liquid. The darkness pressed in on them, growing thicker with each passing second. Emily could feel her pulse quicken as the temperature dropped, and a strange, suffocating pressure filled the air. She glanced around, but there was nothing to see, just shadows. But the whispers. The whispers were growing louder. Lily stepped back, clutching the box in her hands like a lifeline. The drawing seemed to burn into her mind. Its image burned into her retina. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if speaking louder might provoke whatever was listening. Ryan shook his head. "Hear what?" But the others, their faces pale and drawn, began to hear it too. A soft, hissing whisper, like the rustling of dry leaves or a voice carried on the wind. But the whispers were coming from inside the walls, from the very bones of the house. "Come closer." The voice was soft, a seductive whisper that seemed to call them by name, pulling them in, tempting them to step into the shadows. Emily's heart raced, her breath coming in shallow gasps as the whispers continued. "Don't be afraid." Lily's blood ran cold. She could hear the voice distinctly now, clear in her mind, and it was calling to her. It wasn't just the house. It was something inside the house, something far older than any of them could comprehend. Something that had been waiting for them to return. "We need to go," Sarah said, her voice rising in panic. "We need to get out of here, now." But Lily was frozen. She could hear the whispers. Yes, but she could feel something else too. A presence, a figure that wasn't in the room but was in the room. She could feel its cold eyes on her, like the weight of 1,000 stares. But when she turned around, there was nothing there. It was as if the house itself was alive, feeding off their fear, responding to them. And they had fed it for years without even knowing it. She could almost see it in the corners of her eyes, shadowy figures flickering in and out of existence, watching them, waiting. She stepped forward, her legs shaking as she walked toward the attic door. "We have to see it," she said almost to herself. "We have to know what's here." "No," Mark said sharply, grabbing her arm. "We don't have to do anything. We're not kids anymore, Lily. We don't have to play these games." But his grip was weak, his eyes darting nervously around the room. It wasn't a game, it never had been. The house wasn't some old haunted relic. It was alive, and it had been waiting for them to return. The whispers were growing stronger now, and Emily could feel the tension in the air thickening, as though the house itself were pressing against them, pushing them into submission. And then out of the corner of her eye, Lily saw it, a shadow moving just out of reach, like a figure standing in the doorway, but the door wasn't open. There was nothing but the thick, swirling darkness. Yet somehow she could see it. Someone standing there, watching them, The figure's face was pale, its features hidden in the shadows, but Lily could see the eyes, dark, unblinking eyes that were locked on her. And for a split second, she thought she recognized it. But before she could react, the whisper grew louder. "You came back." The figure in the doorway moved. It took a step forward, then another, and the air around them grew colder still. The whispers were deafening now, the shadows pressing in closer, like hands closing around their throats. And then, in an instant, the figure vanished. The room fell silent. Lily gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. "What the hell was that? Is it real?" Ben whispered, his voice trembling. "It was standing there. But no one saw it but you." Lily's mind raced. It couldn't have been real. It couldn't have been. But the feeling in her chest, the weight of that stare, told her otherwise. She turned to the others. "We're not alone here." We never were. They had all been haunted by their childhood memories, yes, but now they were haunted by something far worse. Something that was waiting for them to return, something they could no longer escape. The house had awakened. The house was suffocating them. It wasn't just the heavy air or the oppressive darkness pressing in from all sides. It was the palpable sense that the building itself was aware of their presence. The floorboards creaked under their feet like a sigh of relief, as if the house had waited for this moment for years, decades, maybe even longer. They had returned and it was ready to feed. Lily's breath came in short bursts, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned away from the spot where the shadow had appeared, but her eyes kept darting back to it. That thing, the figure she had seen standing in the doorway, its eyes fixed on her, it wasn't just a hallucination. It wasn't a trick of the light. She knew that with every fiber of her being, but the others didn't seem to understand. They were still fumbling in the darkness, trying to make sense of what they had just experienced. Sarah was clutching her arms as if the temperature had dropped, and Jason kept running his fingers through his hair, as if he couldn't shake the image of the figure out of his mind. "I told you we shouldn't have come here," Jason said, his voice tense. "There's something wrong with this place. It's not just haunted. It's alive." Lily swallowed hard, her hands still shaking from the encounter. "It's not just that. We were chosen." Her voice was hoarse as she spoke the words, the weight of them sinking into her chest like a heavy stone. "All of us. We didn't just stumble upon this house. It was waiting for us." Mark, who had been silent since they first entered the house, finally spoke up. "What do you mean? Chosen for what?" Lily turned to face him, her eyes wide with fear. "It's been waiting for us. All these years it's been waiting. This house, the rituals, it's all tied to us. We didn't just hear the whispers when we were kids. We were part of it. The house has been feeding on our fear ever since we were little." There was a long silence as the others absorbed her words. Mark opened his mouth to speak, but the words died in his throat. He couldn't deny it. Not after what they had seen, the way the house had seemed to respond to them, as if it recognized them. He swallowed hard, stepping closer to Lily. "You're saying we were part of this ritual?" His voice was tight, as if the very idea made him feel nauseous. Lily nodded slowly, her mind racing back to the memories she had long buried. "Yes, everything that happened, everything we saw, it wasn't just our imagination. We were chosen because we were the key. The house, the entity, the shadows. It was all designed to bring us back here." Sarah stepped forward, her eyes wide with disbelief. "But why? Why us? Why were we chosen to be part of this thing?" Lily's voice dropped to a whisper, the realization hitting her harder with each word. "Because we were the ones who survived. The entity needed us to grow stronger. We were the perfect vessels. And when we left, it was still here, waiting. The house has been feeding off our fear, our memories for years." Mark's eyes narrowed, a mixture of anger and confusion bubbling up in him. "So it's been using us? This whole time? For what?" Lily took a step back, her hand trembling as she touched the old, dusty wallpaper, the once familiar designs now twisted and decayed. "It feeds on fear. The more afraid we are, the stronger it gets. That's why it came after us, why we never felt safe. Even after we left, our fear is what keeps it alive. Our memories, our childhood fears, have been the fuel for its power. Jason's face twisted in horror. Are you telling me that all those times we felt it watching us, the nightmares, the shadows, all of it, was feeding this thing? And now it's going to finish what it started? Lily nodded grimly, her heart pounding. Yes, we were always a part of it. The house wasn't just a haunted building, it was the anchor. And the entity, it's been waiting for us to return, to complete what it started all those years ago. It wants us, all of us. It needs us to fuel the next stage of the ritual. The walls of the house seemed to close in, the air thickening with an unseen weight. The very foundation of the building groaned, a sound that sent a jolt of terror through the group. They weren't just visitors to this house. They were intruders, caught in a ritual that had started long before they even realized what was happening. "We have to stop it," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "But how?" Lily swallowed, the answer hanging in her mind like a dark shadow. "We need to destroy the house. The ritual can't continue if we stop it. But to do that, we need to face what we've been running from. Our own memories, our own fears." Mark's eyes widened with realization. "You're talking about confronting it." "Confronting the entity, the thing that's been feeding off us all these years. But we have no idea what it really is, do we? No idea what we're really up against." Lily felt a chill crawl down her spine. She had no answers, no certainty, only the crushing weight of their shared trauma. But one thing was clear, the house was no longer just a memory. It had a life of its own, and they were part of it. Their fear had fed it. Now, to destroy it, they would have to confront the very memories that had haunted them since childhood. "We don't have a choice," she said, her voice shaking. "We have to break the cycle. We have to face it before it takes us all." The whispers from the house seemed to grow louder, as though the building itself was listening. And somewhere, deep inside the walls, something stirred. A dark presence that had been waiting for them to step into its grasp. The revelation that their childhood fears weren't merely figments of imagination, but a twisted ritual set in motion long before their birth left a bitter taste in the air. The realization hit harder than any of them had expected. This wasn't just a haunted house. It wasn't a tale told around a campfire to frighten children into obedience. This was real. It was an ancient, malevolent force that had been waiting for their return, feeding on their fear, drawing them back into its dark web. Lily's hand still shook as she held the drawing, the faces of the children etched into the paper, frozen in a moment of terror. "We were the key." The house, it wasn't just a trap for the spirits. It was a prison for them, she whispered, her voice filled with dread. The entity, the darkness, whatever it is, needed us to complete the ritual. We were never supposed to leave. But we did. Mark, who had been pacing back and forth, stopped suddenly. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. But why us? What makes us so special? Why were we the ones chosen? The shadows in the room seemed to shift as if answering him. The air turned colder still, and Lily could hear the faintest whisper in her ear. She flinched, her heartbeat quickening. "The house was built on land where rituals were performed," she said, her voice low. "Ancient rituals? The people who lived here, who built this place, they were trying to summon something dark. Something ancient." Ryan looked around at the peeling wallpaper, the rusted metal fixtures, the darkened corners of the house. This place was a prison for those who were part of the ritual. The house itself, it's alive. It was designed to keep the ritual going, and when we left, it couldn't continue. Sarah swallowed, her throat dry. "So when we came back, it was like we activated it? We brought it to life again?" Lily nodded, her eyes scanning the room as though the shadows were reaching out to pull her back into the depths of the house. "We didn't just remember the house, we reignited something. The house had been waiting for us. Our fear, it's what kept the ritual alive. And when we came back, we became part of it once more." Mark's voice dropped to a whisper. "So we were never supposed to escape. It's been feeding off us, off our fear. And now it wants us back." The weight of his words hung heavily in the air. Ben, who had been silent for a while, finally spoke, his voice grim. "I remember my grandfather's stories. He was one of the original residents here, one of the first to warn people about the house. He said there were secrets buried in the land, secrets that no one should ever know. But no one listened. Sarah turned to Ben. "What secrets?" Ben hesitated. He looked around, then leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "The house, it was built on the grounds of an old asylum. An asylum that performed horrific experiments. Not just on the patients, but on the people who lived here too. They were trying to unlock something that shouldn't have been touched. The rituals, the symbols, they were meant to summon an ancient force. And the entity, that thing, it's been tied to this land for generations." Jason's face twisted in confusion and fear. "Wait, you're telling me this whole place was built to summon something? A creature? A demon?" "Not just a demon," Ben said, his voice shaking. "A darkness. Something older than the town, older than anyone who's been here. And we were part of the ritual. We were chosen to carry on the legacy of the people who built this place." Lily felt her stomach churn. "That's why we were haunted. That's why we saw things no one else did. The house was feeding on us all along. And now the entity is using our memories, our fears, to become stronger. It's not just a shadow. It's a living, breathing thing." "Then we need to stop it," Sarah said, her voice trembling but resolute. "We can't let it continue." "We can't let it use us anymore," Mark shook his head. "It's too late for that. The entity's power is too strong now. We awakened it by returning here. Our memories, our fear, it's feeding off us and it's growing. The only way to stop it, to truly stop it, is to end the ritual. But we can't do that without destroying everything that made us who we are." Lily's gaze softened, but the truth in her words was unrelenting. "We have to destroy the memories, the ones that made us part of this. If we don't, the entity will keep coming back, and it will never stop." There was a long, heavy pause as the weight of their situation pressed down on them. They weren't just fighting a monster, they were fighting their own memories, their own past. The entity was inside them, inside the very essence of their fear. And to defeat it, they would have to sacrifice everything they had known. "We've been running from this for years," Ben said quietly. "But we can't run anymore. We have to face it. We have to destroy it," Lily added, her voice steady now. "We have to erase everything, or it will never stop." The house creaked ominously around them, the whispers returning, louder now, as though the walls themselves were closing in on them. The entity was close. It had always been close, and now the time had come to face what they had long feared. The walls of the house seemed to close in around them, and with every passing minute the air grew colder, heavier. It was as though the house was responding to their presence, feeding off their unease. The faint whispers that had begun so innocuously were now unmistakable, echoing through the air, rising in intensity as the atmosphere thickened. It was as if the house had a pulse, slow and steady, like the beating of a heart that grew stronger with each passing second. They had uncovered the truth, the house, the rituals, the darkness that had plagued them since childhood, but nothing had prepared them for what was about to happen next. Lily's chest tightened as she glanced around at her friends, their faces drawn with fear and uncertainty. Ben, Mark, Sarah, Jason, they were all here, but none of them were truly here. They were all lost in their own thoughts, the weight of the past bearing down on them with each step they took deeper into the house. The door to the living room slammed shut behind them with a force that sent a shiver through their spines. It wasn't the wind. There was no breeze, no explanation. The house had reacted to their intrusion. "We need to get out of here," Sarah whispered, her voice shaky. Her eyes flickered to the windows, as though she expected to see the shadows from the attic staring back at her. "We're not safe. Whatever this is, it's not going to let us leave." Mark moved to the door, pulling on the handle, but it didn't budge. He tried again, harder this time, his muscles straining, but it was as if the door had been sealed shut by an invisible force. "It's locked," Mark growled in frustration. "It's like the house is trapping us in here." Lily stepped forward, her eyes searching the room. There was a palpable weight in the air now, a suffocating pressure that pressed down on her chest. She could feel it. The entity, the presence they had all sensed, was awake. It was no longer lurking in the shadows. It was here, in the room with them, feeding off the terror that had begun to rise among the group. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder. They were no longer faint murmurs in the background, but distinct voices that seemed to crawl under their skin, filling their minds with horrible images, fragments of long-buried memories. "You cannot escape," a voice hissed, so close that Lily felt the words vibrating in her bones. She spun around, but there was nothing except the shadows which had begun to shift, twisting and spiraling in the dim light of the room. Lily's heart raced. "It's real," she whispered to herself, barely able to process what was happening. "The entity, it's awake. It's feeding off us. The more we fear, the stronger it gets." Jason backed away from the door, his face pale, his breath ragged. "What do we do? How do we stop this? We're trapped here!" The room grew darker. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, pulling toward them, until it felt as though the very walls were closing in. The air was thick with an unsettling, almost suffocating energy. It wasn't just the fear they felt. It was alive, hungry, seeking to devour them. "I told you we shouldn't have come back," Ben said, his voice trembling with panic. "We knew this place was cursed. We should have left it alone." But as he spoke, a terrible sound filled the room, a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very floor beneath them. The ground trembled, the walls shuddered with an ominous groan, and the temperature dropped so suddenly that they could see their breath hanging in the air like cold, invisible smoke. "Come closer," the whisper came again, this time louder and more insistent. It was coming from all around them, filling the room with a maddening chorus of voices. Lily turned to face the others, her eyes wide with terror. It's trying to drag us back into it. It's trying to pull us into the ritual." The room seemed to shift. What had once been a normal, if old-fashioned living room now appeared distorted, as though reality itself was bending. The shadows twisted and crawled, forming shapes that didn't quite make sense. Figures, faces, limbs, all caught in the throes of an endless struggle. Some were childlike, others monstrous, but all had the same hollow, empty eyes. It was as if the house was a living entity, feeding on the memories of the people who had lived there, weaving them into an endless nightmare. "You belong to me now," a voice whispered, its presence pressing into their minds like a vice. The air grew colder still, until they could feel the bite of winter on their skin. And then in an instant it stopped. The house fell eerily still. The shadows receded, and the oppressive weight in the air lifted, only to be replaced with something far worse. The center of the room began to glow, faint at first, then growing stronger with each passing second. The light pulsed like a heartbeat, the shadows shifting to form a pattern, a symbol burned into the very fabric of the house. It was the same symbol they had seen in the blueprints, the one that had appeared in their memories and in the ritual drawings from their childhood. "It's starting," Lily said, her voice tight with fear. "It's finishing what it started. The ritual is completing itself." "No," Sarah gasped, her voice breaking with panic. "We can't stop it. We're too late." Lily looked at the others, her heart sinking. "We're not too late, but we're going to have to sacrifice something, everything, to end this." The pulse in the room grew stronger, the glow from the center of the room now blinding. The walls creaked with the force of the power building around them. The entity, the darkness they had all unknowingly awakened, was reaching its peak, ready to break free from the confines of the house and spread its influence once more. And Lily, finally understanding the full scope of the terror they were facing, realized one horrible truth. The house didn't want them to leave. It had been waiting for them to complete the ritual. The ground beneath them trembled as if the house itself were alive, shaking with anticipation. The air was thick with an overwhelming sense of dread, like the entire structure was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. The pulse in the center of the room beat louder now, vibrating through their bones, as if the entity at the heart of the house was awakening for the final time. Lily felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end as she watched the flickering glow from the center of the room, the dark shape forming and shifting within it. The symbols carved into the walls seemed to writhe, alive, as though they were pulling the very air toward the source of the light. The whispers, once a distant murmur, now felt like they were inside her head, their voices merging with her thoughts. "Come closer," the voice repeated, now a chant, low and commanding. The others were frozen in place, their eyes wide, their bodies tense with terror. They had all felt it. The house was not just trapping them. It was controlling them. They had come here to confront their past, to face their childhood nightmares. But now it seemed their very memories were being twisted against them. "I don't understand," Jason whispered, his voice strained with fear. "Why is this happening? Why us?" Lily's breath caught in her throat. She had felt the question burning in her mind for years. But now, in the heart of the house, with the entity's presence pressing down on her, she finally understood the truth. "They didn't just choose us," she said, her voice barely audible. "We were the ritual. Every nightmare, every fear. It was always about us. We were the ones who opened the door." A chill passed over them, and for the first time, they all felt it. The sudden weight of realization. The past they had tried to escape, the memories they had buried, were not just memories at all. They had been part of something far darker, something woven into the fabric of this house, this land, for generations. "It wasn't random," Mark said, his voice shaky. "The house, it needed us." Lily nodded, her hand shaking as she pointed to the center of the room where the light seemed to pulse. "The house chose us to be part of its cycle. It feeds on us, on our fear, on our memories. And we've been feeding it every time we thought we were running from it. But we never left. It never let us leave. They were trapped in the house, but it wasn't the house that had trapped them. It was their own minds, their own fears, their own unresolved trauma. The house had waited for them to return, knowing they would come back to confront what they had left behind. "You're the key," a voice whispered again, this time louder, as if the walls themselves were speaking to them. "The key to release me," Lily's mind reeled. The key. The words were echoing through her mind. She wasn't just here to stop the entity, she was the one who had unleashed it. But she wasn't alone. She turned slowly to the others. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with terror. They understood just as she did. They had been part of this all along. But the entity had a different plan. It wasn't just after them, it was after one of them, the one who remembers the most. Lily's voice faltered as she turned to Ben. He was standing at the back of the room, his face drawn, his eyes filled with guilt. Ben's face was drained of color, his hand gripping the door frame for support. He had been the one to remember first. The house had called him, drawn him back to the place they had all tried to forget. "No," Ben whispered, his voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to. I didn't." "You brought it back," the voice inside the walls hissed. "You remembered." Ben's body stiffened and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He took a shaky step backward, but the air around him seemed to press him forward, forcing him closer to the center of the room. "No," Ben whispered again, his voice filled with despair. I was just a kid. I didn't know. I didn't know what it was doing to us." Lily felt a sharp pang in her chest as she watched Ben, realizing the truth that had always been buried in the back of their minds. He had been the first. The walls of the house felt like they were closing in on them, the air thick with a suffocating presence. The whispers had become more than just sounds. They were alive, curling around their thoughts, twisting through their minds, feeding on their most vulnerable memories. The pulse from the center of the room was louder now, a rhythmic thumping, like the beating of a dark heart, growing stronger with each passing second. Lily stood frozen, her hand still trembling as she stared at Ben, who seemed to be lost in his own mind. The realization was horrifying. Ben had been the one to unknowingly break the seal, the one who had brought the entity back. His childhood memories, the ones he had locked away, had called the darkness back to the house, and now they were all trapped in a waking nightmare. A nightmare that was pulling them back into their childhood fears, fears they had long buried. The floor creaked beneath their feet, and Emily could feel the pressure building. The house wasn't just a place. It was an entity, alive, feeding on them, manipulating them. It had waited for them, feeding off their memories, their fear, until it had become too strong to stop. "We need to leave," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "This isn't a house anymore. This is a prison. It's controlling us." But Lily knew there was no escape. Not until they faced what had been waiting for them all along. The darkness had already begun to manifest, first through the shadows, and now it was real. The things they had once feared as children, the monsters that had haunted their dreams, were walking the halls with them, taking physical form. "I can feel it," Mark muttered, his eyes wide as he stepped backward, a tremor in his hands. "The things we saw when we were kids. They're here." Before anyone could respond, a cold gust of wind swept through the room, making the candles flicker and the shadows dance along the walls. Then a sudden movement caught Lily's eye. In the corner of the room, the shadows twisted unnaturally, and something shifted, its outline barely visible in the dim light. It was tall, its shape hunched, and its silhouette was unmistakable. Lily's breath caught in her throat as the figure fully emerged from the shadows. It was the creature she had seen in her nightmares, the same one that had haunted her childhood. Its elongated limbs stretched unnaturally, its pale skin stretched tight across its skeletal frame. Its face, if it could be called a face, was a void, with nothing but darkness where its eyes should have been. "Lily," the creature whispered in a voice that was at once too familiar and utterly alien. Its voice was a horrible blend of the whispers from her past, twisting her name into something sinister. "We've been waiting for you." The figure moved toward her, its limbs dragging unnaturally along the floor. The room seemed to grow colder with every step it took. The floor beneath her feet creaked, and the air felt like it was thick with something wrong, something unnatural. "No!" Lily screamed, her voice trembling. The room seemed to distort as the monstrous figures loomed over them, their shadows stretching far beyond what should have been possible. The air was thick with terror, each breath they took heavier than the last, as if the house itself were inhaling with them. The creatures, they were not just nightmares. They were alive, drawn from the very essence of their childhood fears. And now the house had given them form. The walls groaned as the shadows twisted, feeding off the energy of their panic. And each figure that took shape seemed to grow stronger. Lily, still reeling from the sight of her childhood nightmare, the faceless figure that had chased her through the darkness, fought to keep her composure. Her legs trembled as the figure moved closer, its featureless face leering at her, its body contorting unnaturally. Its limbs stretched and shrank with every movement, like it couldn't decide whether it was trying to escape or draw closer. She knew it was feeding off her fear, the very fear that had haunted her for so many years. But now, something inside her snapped. She couldn't let it take her again. Not like this. Not after everything they'd been through. "We have to stop it," Lily said, her voice trembling but resolute. "We have to face it, all of it." Mark turned to her, his face pale, his eyes wide with the terror that mirrored her own. "We're fighting shadows, Lily. How can we stop something like this?" But Lily knew the truth now. They had been running from this for so long, running from the memories, running from the fears, running from the truth. But it wasn't just the house that had trapped them. It was their own minds, the entity, the darkness. It was all born from their own fear, their own childhood trauma. It had been feeding off them for years, growing stronger with each passing moment. Jason took a step forward, his body shaking. He had seen his own fear come to life. The thing that had lurked in the corners of his room when he was a child, the faceless, twisting creature with gaping jaws. "It's not just the house, is it? It's us. It's our fear that's feeding it," Lily nodded. "Yes, the entity has been feeding on us, on our deepest fears, for as long as we've been running, and it won't stop until it has everything we have left." Sarah, her voice choked with emotion, took a step back. "But how do we stop it? How do we face all of this, our own demons? We have to break the cycle," Lily said, her voice stronger now as the weight of their situation settled into her bones. "We have to destroy the memories that gave it life. We have to confront the darkness, all of it. The entity, the house, the monsters. It's all a reflection of what we've been running from. The only way to stop it is to face the truth. Ben, who had been silent until now, stared at Lily with wide, unblinking eyes. He had always been the one to remember first, the one who had inadvertently brought them all back here. But now, as the room seemed to shrink and the shadows closed in, he could no longer deny what they were facing. "The entity, it's us, isn't it?" Ben whispered, his voice hoarse with realization. "All these years, the house, the shadows, it's been using our fear, our memories to get stronger." Lily's gaze met his, her chest tightening as she nodded. "We were never just victims of some haunting. We were part of it. Our fear, our trauma, we created it. And the only way to destroy it is to destroy the memories we gave it." Mark clenched his fists, his jaw tight with frustration. "But how do we destroy our memories? How do we erase something so real, so deep inside us?" Lily took a deep breath, the weight of the decision looming over her. "We have to sacrifice the part of us that's been feeding it. Our childhood fears, our innocence, everything that we've been holding on to. We need to break free from it. We need to forget it." The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking into the hearts of everyone in the group. To destroy the entity, to stop the cycle, they had to let go. They had to sacrifice the very memories that had shaped them, the memories that had made them who they were. But in doing so, they would lose the very essence of their childhood, the very thing that had made them human. "No," Sarah said suddenly, her voice trembling with fear. I can't forget. I can't just erase my memories." Lily's heart broke at the fear in Sarah's eyes. She knew how much this would cost. But they had no choice. "We don't have a choice," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's the only way." And then, as if in response to their desperate realization, the entity made its final move. The shadows around them began to converge, twisting into an impenetrable darkness. The room seemed to pulse with energy, the very air vibrating as if the house itself were alive, thrumming with the power of the entity that had grown too strong to ignore. The walls groaned, the floor cracked, and the whispering grew louder, more insistent. The entity was closing in on them, its darkness creeping toward the center of the room like a storm, preparing to devour them. But in that moment of chaos, Lily found herself standing tall. She turned to face the others, her eyes filled with determination. "We have to face it, together. We can do this, but we can't do it alone. We have to let go of the past." Ben stepped forward, his hand shaking, but his resolve clear. "Let's do it." Jason nodded, and Mark followed suit. Each of them stepping forward in solidarity, their faces set with grim determination. "Face your fear," the entity whispered, the voice seeping into their minds. "Let it consume you." But this time they didn't flinch. They didn't run. Together, they faced the darkness, ready to confront the memories that had chained them to this place, to break the cycle. The whispers reached a deafening crescendo as the darkness rushed toward them, and Lily closed her eyes, her heart racing. She reached for her childhood fear, pulled it close, and then, with every ounce of strength, she let it go. And with that final act of surrender, the entity screamed in fury, its power crumbling, breaking apart. The darkness began to unravel, the shadows dissipating into nothingness. The room grew quiet, the pulse fading, and for the first time in decades, the house fell still. The room fell into an eerie silence, the darkness that had once consumed them now dissipating into the air like smoke. For a moment, they stood there, breathless and disoriented, the aftermath of the entity's collapse hanging in the air like a heavy fog. The house, the entity, had been vanquished, but at what cost? Lily's chest tightened, her heart still racing, her thoughts reeling from the immense weight of what had just occurred. She could feel the absence of the entity, the void left behind by its departure. The shadows that had once whispered their names now seemed distant, like fading echoes. But the stillness felt unnatural, as though something was waiting for them to make the next move. "We did it," Mark whispered, his voice hoarse, filled with disbelief. He was standing near the center of the room, staring into the place where the pulse of darkness had once been. "We stopped it." But even as he spoke, a deep sense of unease settled in. They had faced their deepest fears and won. But the house, the land, it wasn't done with them yet. The ritual had been broken, but the cost was unimaginable. To destroy the entity, they had been forced to sacrifice their childhood memories, their innocence. They had severed their connection to the very essence of who they were. "I feel empty," Sarah said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She stood near the broken window, staring out into the night. Her face was pale, her eyes distant. "I don't remember everything anymore. It's like a part of me is missing." Lily nodded slowly, her chest tightening at Sarah's words. They had destroyed the entity, but in doing so, they had erased the memories that had shaped their childhood, the fears, the innocence, the pain. They had sacrificed their connection to the past, to each other, and now they were left with nothing but the cold emptiness that remained. "I feel it too," Jason said, his voice heavy with regret. "The fear? It's gone, but so is everything else. I don't feel like myself anymore." Ben, who had been standing near the corner, turned toward them, his face drawn and weary. "We made a choice. We chose to stop it. We had to give up something to save ourselves." Lily's gaze shifted to him. Ben had always been the one who remembered first, the one who had led them back to this house to confront their past. He had been the catalyst for everything that had happened. And now, as the echoes of the entity's power faded, it seemed like the weight of the sacrifice was heavier on him than anyone else. "I don't know if I can live with this," Ben murmured, his voice breaking as he spoke the words. "I don't know if we made the right choice." The others fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Lily closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She understood. They had all sacrificed so much to stop the entity, but in doing so, they had lost pieces of themselves, pieces of who they were, who they had once been. The memories that had defined them, both the good and the bad, were gone. And now, they were left with nothing but the present, and the knowledge that they could never return to the way things had been. "We don't have a choice," Lily said softly, her voice steady but filled with sorrow. "We did what we had to do. The house, the entity. They would have destroyed us if we hadn't, but now, we need to move forward. We can't keep looking back." Mark stepped forward, his hand reaching out to rest on Lily's shoulder. "We've all been through so much," he said quietly. "But we can't let this haunt us forever. We can rebuild. We can move on." But even as he spoke, Lily could feel the truth in his words. The house had been destroyed, the ritual broken, but the scars, the emptiness would remain. The house would never truly be gone, not as long as they remembered it. They had faced their fears, but the cost had been too high. They had lost their connection to each other, to their childhoods, and now they were left with nothing but a haunting sense of finality. And then, as if to confirm her thoughts, the house shuddered. A low groan reverberated through the floorboards, and the walls creaked as if they were breathing. Lily's heart skipped a beat as she turned toward the source of the sound. It was coming from the foundation, deep within the bowels of the house. "Wait," she said, her voice barely audible. "It's not over." The others turned toward her, their faces filled with confusion and fear. But before they could respond, the ground beneath their feet seemed to give way, and the entire house shuddered with violent force. The walls cracked, the windows shattered, and the floor beneath them split open, revealing a dark void below. From the depths of the house, a strange, otherworldly sound rose, a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to shake the very foundation of the earth. It was a sound unlike anything they had ever heard before, a noise that seemed to come from the very core of the house itself. Lily's breath caught in her throat. The house, the entity, it wasn't finished. The cycle never ends. The voice echoed through the house, low and menacing, carrying with it the weight of centuries of darkness. And as the group looked at each other in horror, they realized the terrifying truth. The house had not been destroyed. It had only been paused. The darkness, the entity, was always going to return. There would always be new memories to feed it, new fears to sustain it, and the cycle would begin again.